director, Stephen Carroll. Hello there.
Hello, Catherine.
We're going to stay with our top story of Ukraine. World markets really sent into a tailspin by the news from there on Monday. Is that continuing on?
A pretty different picture, in fact, on the markets today. Over in Asia, the Hang Seng in Hong Kong is actually back in positive territory. This as investors there look ahead to the Chinese legislative session, which begins tomorrow. The Nikkei in Japan also gaining back some of those losses that we saw yesterday across the board. The Shanghai Composite and the Kospi and Seoul still trading in negative territory. Some analysts, in fact, suggesting that the greatest effect of the Ukrainian crisis on the markets, in Asia at least, may have passed. We'll have to, of course, wait and see how that pans out over the coming days. A different picture than what happened on Wall Street on Monday, though. All of the main indices pushed into the red despite a host of positive economic data coming out from the United States yesterday. Those markets worried about the threat of a possible Russian military intervention in Ukraine. The biggest falls, though, on the markets were seen in Europe and particularly in Moscow, where the MICEX index closed down almost 10.8%. Investors fled Russian stocks over fears of potential sanctions from the United States and the effect that a conflict could have on the country's economy. Joseph Tandy has more.
As tensions mount in Ukraine, investors in Moscow are already on the retreat. On Monday, a stock market plunge wiped more than 40 billion euros off Russian stocks. The ruble fell to a record low.
The whole market just gave way. Investors couldn't help noticing the foreign policy events over the weekend, when markets were closed.
With Moscow ramping up the rhetoric over Crimea, the market panic highlights how Russia's economy could be the country's weak spot. Growth has slowed to under 2%, inflation's high, while investment levels lie stagnant.
Clearly, investors are looking for an exit. I think the equity market will be an obvious casualty. I think it's going to be a very tough battle for the Russian authorities to try and stem the slide of the ruble in the current environment without some degree of capital control being instituted.
Losses will only increase if the West applies economic sanctions. Beyond the immediate damage, analysts say Russia's image is on the line in the eyes of investors.
As an investor, you have to fear the worst. I suspect it will be a diplomatic resolution. There won't be a significant military conflict, but the prospect of sanctions, the G8 meeting coming up where Russia's supposed to be hosting it, the potential for other countries to boycott that and not turn up there, I think those are the issues for markets.
With much of Europe depending on Russian gas, Western countries have so far avoided threatening economic boycotts. Instead, the United States has named asset freezes and visa bans among measures on the table.
Now, we know that the markets do like certainty, and of course things like the crisis in Ukraine do send investors towards traditional safe havens of investments. Gold, of course, being prime among them. Let's take a look at what happened to the gold price yesterday. This is the COMEX index. You can see the spike there as trading opened on Monday. It closed up $2 in trading yesterday, hitting the highest level since last September. And we can expect that sort of flight to continue as the uncertainty on the stock markets continues.
Great news for anyone wanting to sell a bit of gold there. Looking ahead to later on today, we've been talking very much about the political, diplomatic dimensions of the Ukraine story, but someone from a delegation from the International Monetary Fund heading to Kiev to talk about the financial side.
That's right, and this is really the most pressing issue for the new government in Ukraine. The IMF delegation is to begin laying the foundations for a potential $2 billion emergency loan for the Ukrainian government. It'll be a special rapid financing deal aimed at keeping the country afloat. Ukraine says that it needs some $35 billion over the next 2 years. But for now, the EU and the IMF say that the country has enough foreign currency reserves to stay afloat for now and make the next repayments on its bonds. But this loan, the idea behind it is it will stop a potential run on the banks and any further difficulties, just to stabilise the situation. But as we know, money from the IMF doesn't come without strings attached. They're going to want strict reforms of the Ukrainian economy, including a possible privatisation of those key oil and gas industries. But the Prime Minister in Ukraine says the country's ready to take the difficult decisions.
This government will fulfil all obligations imposed by the International Monetary Fund, simply because we have no other way. An economy which lives on loans and does not create income will be catastrophic. That's why we will have to carry out the harshest reforms.
Okay, we're going to look to the United States next then. President Obama getting out his pencil and paper, working out his sums for the budget for the year ahead.
Yeah, he's going to unveil his 2015 budget plans later on. It's expected to drop plans to cut retirement funding and also seeking new investment in infrastructure and education. The president also wants to widen an income tax credit, which will cost around $60 billion. Now, this plan essentially stands no chance of being implemented in its current format. Congress, as we know, budget battles there tend to be very drawn out and long, but it is the opening salvo in next year's midterm election campaign and will lay out the blueprint, I suppose, for spending plans for the United States for the year to come.
Okay, well, speaking of spending plans, a lot of us living in big cities like Paris have to work out ours quite carefully, don't we? It's quite an expensive city, Paris, but you've got a new survey that shows that it's not the most expensive city to live in.
No, close but not quite. Singapore, in fact, topped the list from the Economist Intelligence Unit's World Cost of Living survey. Its strong currency, reliance on imports and high transport costs pushed it into the top spot. It's also the most expensive place in the world to buy clothes, in case you're visiting.
Okay.
The study examines 400 different prices across 131 cities, areas like food, drink, rent, transport, that sort of thing. Paris did come in as number 2 on the list, though, according to this survey by the Economist Intelligence Unit, followed by
That does
Oslo,
not surprise me at all.
Zurich and Sydney. Exactly. I mean, it doesn't surprise many of us that either visit or have lived here. The longer list, though, does include a lot more Asian and Australian cities. That's largely because of currency movements. Interesting, I can tell you, Paris, among the top 10, is the most expensive for a litre of petrol, but the least expensive for a bottle of wine. So it's not all bad news.
Excellent. Fill up your car with wine and you'll be fine. Thanks very much. Stephen Carroll there with the Business News, back in an hour's time with more. We're going to move on now, though, to taking a look at the top stories getting us tweeting and liking on the internet. It's Web News.
On Sunday, Ukrainian